All Elite Wrestling is a place where the best certainly do still wrestle. It's a place where inspired wrestling moments are rarely too far away. But it's also a company guilty of doing one frustrating thing over and over again in recent times. And you've likely clicked on this video here today because either you're already very much and painfully aware of this particular secret mistake, or you just want this idiot to stop messing around and get right to the point. Either way, I'm Gareth, this is What Culture Wrestling, and this is the secret critical mistake AEW keeps making. So AEW was once the babyface promotion. They brought back blood and unscripted promos. They produced state-of-the-art wrestling matches. They well and truly took the piss out of WWE when fans were desperately wanting the receipts. In Jon Moxley, they booked a great heroic babyface champion that fans really hadn't seen in North America at least for years, and elicited a frenzied energy that resuscitated pro wrestling as much as its superb detail-heavy storylines. AEW was the babyface promotion. Past tense. A lack of leadership surrounding the whole brawl-out debacle. The various misadventures into a sports entertainment direction. The numbing sense that they've pretty much signed everybody they can and done everything with them, and just a general creative decline. And then you have that malaise that was always going to impact the company 5 years into its existence. In other words, all of the above has now led to the feeling, disappearing. Caught in a never-ending, we're so back, it is so over cycle, AEW is just no longer the red-hot, life-affirming product that it was, like, up until about 2021. A major problem with its approach since 2022 is that AEW still insists that it is the absolute lifeblood of professional wrestling. So let's jump back to 2022 for a moment, when a certain Chris Jericho created his newest faction that was known as the Jericho Appreciation Society. The idea was to parody all things sports entertainment and then just really annoy all the fans in the audience that love pro wrestling and were pro wrestling through and through. And the honour of pro wrestling was apparently being defended by the Blackpool Combat Club. The storyline peaked at Double or Nothing with the seminal debut of the Anarchy in the Arena match. It was magnificent. Beyond that though, it just sort of dragged on. And freaking on. There was little in the way of true progression nor emotional investment. Now there were highs, yes, like the rather underrated Chris Jericho versus Ortiz hair versus hair match, for example. But the whole thing just played out under the same one-dimensional premise. Before we carry on with the rest of the video though, I want to know, because we're talking about like underrated matches, what is your most underrated match in AEW history? You drop your answers in the comment section down below. And now, let's get back to this whole secret mistake stuff. So the whole pro wrestlers versus sports entertainers thing was pretty much just a pretext to do a lot of matches. The faces won some and then the heels won some. Oh, shocking, I know. And in the end, after Jon Moxley acknowledged that this whole ordeal had gone on long enough, it was pro wrestling that won the great battle for AEW when Claudio Castagnoli beat Chris Jericho at Ring of Honor Final Battle. Yeah, that's how it ended. This glorified all-hail AEW storyline was the definition of something that only really works in theory. Now, the conflict existed between the characters, sure, but the stakes did not. It was ultimately such a broad, non-specific, and ultimately meh thing to fight over. Now, a lot of people care about AEW, obviously. I mean, just look at this channel, there's AEW everywhere. People want to love this thing. But as evidenced by the decline in popularity, they don't necessarily care about it as a fictional construct. Not in the same way they care about a monumental title feud or a hate-fueled blood war. Not in the same way they care about CM Punk versus MJF or Kenny Omega versus Hangman Adam Page. Then, in 2023, Tony Khan booked an umbrella program under a similar idea. This was much worse though, and being a women's program in AEW, it was not afforded the Anarchy in the Arena match, of course not. Written, in effect, because Saraya had only gone and turned herself heel by walking into AEW with a sense of entitlement, herself, Toni Storm, and Ruby Soho formed the Outcasts. They were a heel group who felt they were above all things AEW, which had apparently treated them very poorly shortly after they'd jumped over. The dim memory of the program extends as far as the Outcasts cheated in every single match, And it all effectively culminated with a heel Saraya getting a babyface hometown victory in Wembley before the title was then switched to Toni Storm, who, rather than represent AEW as a saviour babyface figure going forward, immediately turned heel. So what was the point of all this? Well, I'll tell you. The point, at least for a while there, was to lean in lazily on the idea that AEW was the babyface promotion, and that Dr. Britt Baker and the rest of the other OGs were to eventually topple those ex-WWE figures with their cheating and their awful finishes. Bleh. That AEW would prevail against those forces trying to meddle with its benevolent gift to the industry of pro wrestling. And thanks for watching this benevolent gift to pro wrestling too. Now go and click that subscribe button down below if you like what you see. And what will I do? I will go back to talking about... oh yeah, that's right. The idea of AEW as the purely good spiritual home of pro wrestling that must be protected at all costs. In addition to throttling the far more successful ticket-selling philosophy of personal animosity is, well, it's arrogant. And this mentality, off-putting when AEW as a wider product is lacking, has crept in elsewhere to become the defining narrative. While definitely not as blatant, there were definitely shades of this during the Elite vs Blackpool Combat Club feud in 2023, for example. The idea, and it was barely even articulated, was that the BCC resented the Elite's vision for AEW. The Elite were, as spoken by Bryan Danielson, who was definitely not a substitute for CM Punk in this program, amateurs. The idea here was to make the Elite feel like the Elite again after the group had felt very much removed from everything following on from Brawl Out. It wasn't an actively bad idea, admittedly, but still this whole AEW is the true path stuff rang hollow again. And for the second consecutive year, AEW's big summer program is now being driven by CM Punk, which is a problem in and of itself. That ghost is just never going to be exercised, is it? Tony Khan's method of handling the backstage events of All In London have now compelled the Young Bucks to make a power play for the very company in 2024 with a little help from Kazuchika Okada and Jack Perry. But the idea itself is, well, it's half-baked. The new Elite have taken out Tony Khan, who still has the ability to book Collision entirely in his vision, unimpeded. And they also took out Kenny Omega. But they've hardly taken over the promotion, have they? If you turned on Dynamite or Collision for vast stretches of each show over the last few weeks, you'd probably have no idea that there has been some kind of hostile takeover. FTR, Bryan Danielson, and Eddie Kingston have taken it upon themselves to defend the honor of AEW, leading to the sort of pro-AEW rhetoric that Cody Rhodes actually perfected back in November 2019. Now, the level of detail here is actually quite impressive, I will admit. Like the foreshadowing of the attacks on Khan and Omega through the renaming of the Young Bucks arsenal, and the hints towards Okada's arrival through the fines levied at various staffers. But in addition to everything else, it is just a bit repetitive. And beyond the logic gaps of the Elite versus Team AEW, the premise of the story is yet another bid to present AEW as the sacred ground of pro wrestling. The Tony Khan idolatry underpinning this whole program is a bit masturbatory too. There's more than a hint of the god complex to it, isn't there? You can't lay your hands on TK. He saved wrestling for you and for the families of everybody trying to make it in this business. Now, all of this might be a little bit easier to stomach if it still actually felt like AEW had saved wrestling and they were still in the middle of their invincible streak. But the entitlement hard-coded into the DNA of the promotion is now getting a bit much. Just promote great shows with no self-aggrandizing approach. That's how you get the feeling back. I mean, a feeling by definition cannot be forced. It has to be felt. I mean, there used to be a time where independent contractors did not give a damn where they worked, remember? They just wanted to win the big one, or beat to a bloody pulp anybody who prevented them from doing that, and honestly, it was often a lot better. While AEW has retained the ability to put on very good to excellent shows more than half the time, the babyface promotion ideal no longer exists, and as a direct result, this storytelling philosophy is propped up by, well, nothing. To put it more succinctly, AEW is breaking the very first rule of storytelling, and gauging by low or middling interest levels, its fanbase is too sophisticated to fall for it. AEW is telling you that it's great and what it stands for is great and that you should think it's, well, great. It is pandering. It's like AEW were just playing to the gallery. This bid to create a cultish siege mentality is seriously off-putting if you're not somebody who is a mega loyal, devout weekly watcher. One who either earnestly loves everything that AEW does or just desperately wants to believe in the vision. If you're a discerning fan with a slightly diminished faith in the process, though, this rah-rah stuff is seriously eye-rolling. You have to honestly believe that the brand is the star, and that is really difficult when you've lost the feeling. Through this type of story, it's as if AEW is desperately clinging on to the idea of what it used to be and how it used to be perceived. And that just makes it all feel hollow and grabby and desperate. This mentality extends beyond the latest stand-up for AEW storyline too. Adam Copeland cutting promos about how great it is that AEW exists, Dax Harwood appointing himself as the company mascot, and to a lesser extent, Will Ospreay's relentless drive to put the company over. All of this just highlights AEW feeling like it loves its own reflection and wants you to stare lovingly at it up and down the card like, oh, look at that thing. The worst bad faith grifters will tell you that AEW books for its niche audience with its constant stream of random bangers. Now they are wrong, of course, because wrestling is itself a storyline vehicle, and the many storylines that AEW books are actually really easy to understand. But they are actually half right, even if they don't really know why. AEW increasingly books for those that already love it and want that love to be reinforced. And the persecution complex that very much exists to be AEW is to be constantly under attack has almost unconsciously infiltrated the storytelling model. But in reality, to be AEW is to do storytelling to an elite level. That's what it is. It's time that Tony Khan grasped that all over again and started showing people how great AEW is without telling them. AEW can't be the stakes, AEW has to be the backdrop to the stakes. Personal issues, that draws money. Hatred, that draws money. Put simply, AEW as the storyline driver is doing as much to draw houses as AEW the company in 2024. Have you enjoyed this video about the secret critical mistake that AEW continues to make? Then hop into a time machine with me and check out this 10 secrets behind the rise of AEW video for memories of a more positive time. Bye bye.